this to be about 6 minutes, if that. So let's get this started, okay? So the next thing, the very last part we need to look here is the 1920s election. Wilson's idealism in the Treaty of Versailles led Americans to vote for the Republicans. Remember, Wilson is the Democrat that led us through World War I, but at the end of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles ended the war, and one of Wilson's 14 points was the fact that he wanted a League of Nations, a general association of nations that is supposed to talk things out rather than fight things. But to a lot of people, including Henry Cabot Lodge, one of the leading Republicans, that kind of looks like an alliance, which is exactly what got us into the war. So basically, everybody shuns the Democrats and Wilson, and they go for the Republicans, and the Republican nominee was this guy named Warren G. Harding. The U.S. turned inward. It feared anything that was European. It's kind of like that saying, you get burnt once, you don't go back for it again, right? So World War I kind of burned us with the Europeans. We lost a lot of men. We lost a lot of money. We lost a lot of stuff, and we didn't even sign the Treaty of Versailles. So everybody kind of turns back towards isolationism. Remember, the war is over. It's time to party. But in the 1920 election, everybody goes for, Republican, Warren G. Harding. Entire country basically goes Republican, minus just a little bit of the South. Still goes Democrat. Debs is still kind of in it, but let's be honest, not really. But with that, this is the 1920 electoral map. Now, what you need to know about politics in the 1920s, it's entirely Republican, and it's entirely a return to, are you ready to write something out beside this slide? Laissez-faire. Laissez-faire. Big old capital letters, laissez-faire. Do you remember what laissez-faire means? Let it be. So here's what happens. Harding basically, and the Republicans basically get to what we call, and I want you to make sure you circle this, a return to normalcy, which is getting back to a peacetime non-war economy. He takes and he appoints Herbert Hoover, heard of him before, as Secretary of Commerce, and a guy named Andrew Mellon as Secretary of Treasury. These guys basically say the business of business is business, the government needs to stay out of it, and literally the government is just there to support business. So this is kind of one of those times when American history you kind of see and you're like, oh my God, we're going back to that. During the Gilded Age, we'd had laissez-faire, political bosses, the monopolists, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the J.P. Morgans running the government. And then, of course, with one big swing of his big stick, Teddy Roosevelt takes and busts up the trusts and all this kind of stuff like that. And then Woodrow Wilson in the Progressive era kind of continues it, but then World War I intervenes, and all of a sudden it's after the war, the Republicans take back over again, and here we have laissez-faire. Now, one thing that it says right here, I want to make sure you put a little star by it, is the Ohio Gang. This is kind of known, the political cronies of Warren G. Harding. I'm going to be honest with you. Harding, here he is right here, okay, is not exactly known historically as a very honest person. Him and his cabinet and his friends, here's a picture of this guy named Albert B. Fall of the Teapot Dome scandal. I'll talk about it in just a second. They were known as the Ohio Gang. You can kind of see this picture right here. Harding, third from the right, here he is right here. His vice president, Silent Cal or Calvin Coolidge right here. I'm going to take over for Harding. And all these guys here, Herbert Hoover, this is somebody you're going to get to know pretty well. These are known as the Ohio Gang. They're not exactly the best guys in the world. Now, Harding's return to normalcy, and here's something you need to know. So star this slide, is tariffs. What is a tariff out beside the slide? A tariff is a tax on import. I hope you said that. Tariffs are going to be raised because we want everybody to buy American. Corporate income taxes are cut to help the businesses. Remember laissez-faire, let it be. The business of business is, or the business of government is business. And spending cuts, meaning they want to take the government spending and go down. That way they can decrease the taxes. Now here's the quote, the business of government is business. And a return to isolationism, I probably should have put and laissez-faire economics. You might want to add that in right there, laissez-faire economics. But that's your Republican policies of the 1920s. Now there is one scandal you need to know about in particular, and that's the Teapot Dome scandal. So why don't you go ahead and take this slide down, pause it, take it down, and then replay it in a second. Okay, Teapot Dome scandal, Secretary of the Interior, again another cabinet position. This guy's name is Albert B. Fall, leased Naval Reserve land in Teapot Dome, Wyoming. That's where it gets its name. And literally he leases it to his friends and then pockets the money. So this guy, a cabinet position, takes and leases government land, technically owned by the public, and takes and people drill on it for oil, take that oil and give some of the profits to this Secretary of Interior, Albert B. Fall, and the government never knows anything about it. The public never knows anything about it. But this Secretary of Interior, Albert B. Fall, gets rich, and all of a sudden this is happening with the consent of the government. Fall is found guilty of taking a bribe. Sinclair and this guy named Downey were acquitted of all charges. And basically what happens is this scandal goes down in history as one of the biggest scandals of the 1920s. The cartoon, I think, is really kind of a interesting cartoon. I don't know if I have it here in just a second. Oh, here it is. Oh, no, wait. There it is. It just kind of is a very visual image of the Teapot Dome scandal. Remember, they were drilling for oil, so it's called an oil scandal, and you have a teapot here, and these guys are running towards the White House. So there's your kind of interesting look at that. Now, I told you Harding's Vice President Coolidge takes over. Literally, Republican presidents appeal to American values and also isolationism. So Harding is elected very easily, but he dies 2 years into his term. So 2 years into his term, his vice president takes over. Scandals break out, Teapot Dome, etc. Calvin Coolidge becomes president after he dies in 1923. Now, Silent Cal. Let's go ahead and talk about Calvin Coolidge here. We don't really know very much about Silent Cal, only the fact that he basically just continues Harding's "The Business of America is Business." He's Republican. He is in office from 1923 to 1929. He's a very low maintenance president, except for the fact that we just know he's laissez-faire, 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 and continues that kind of return to normalcy of tariffs and low taxes and low spending cuts. But with that, he's a Republican president, 1924 election. He basically just continues, very last slide, the Republican fiscal program. Literally, laissez-faire, big business. Low taxes, low spending, high tariffs equals a strong national economy. There are two things you need to star right here. The Ford-McCumber tariff that is part of this, and the Hawley-Smoot tariffs in the 1920s and 30s raised the tariff to an unbelievable, I need you to highlight or circle this, 60%. Holy Toledo. 60% tariff, which means we are going to raise tariffs like crazy on foreign goods, which you know what the foreign people are going to do to us? They're going to raise taxes on our goods like crazy. So now we're in a tariff war. So I raise tariffs on you, you raise tariffs on me, and now nobody buys anything. And if you don't have the government spending any money and nobody's buying anything, and everybody in the 1920s consumerism bought everything on credit, what do you see about to happen? The Great Depression. You're absolutely right. So good job on these notes, guys. Remember, you're supposed to come to class with a working knowledge of the notes. Make sure you get everything you need to. Re-listen to a section if you didn't quite get it. Y'all are awesome. You're doing a great job, and hopefully we're going to be getting our iPads soon.